Mm.
Hi, Ingo.
Hi, Noah, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Very good.
So, we are waiting for the people to join. I see one of the speakers are calling. Let me pick a call and then I'll join. So, Pradeep is on a call, but he will also be a co-host, allowing people to join.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Morgan. Good afternoon. How are you?
Good. Hi, Ingo. How are you?
Very good. So you are one of the interpreters, yeah? Is it correct?
Yeah.
Do you know the second one?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's Etienne. He's here. Yeah.
Yeah, I will change my name so you know it's me.
Yeah,
Oh,
me
okay.
too, actually.
Okay, I will assign you now. Then, you're already there. That's
No, we are
okay.
here, but we're not assigned yet, so you
Yes.
can go ahead.
Yes, one moment. I'm just doing it. Morgan. No, Morgan, what's your name again?
I int English, French, Morgan.
Okay. Okay, now I see it. Okay. Okay, now I will assign you. Okay, very good. So I don't change my channel because I understand French, but maybe we can still try. I'm going into the English channel now. Can you say something in English? Yes. Yes. Yes, very well. Okay. Okay, good. I go back to the general. So if you, yeah, okay, that's fine. Mm.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our meeting, the African People's Assembly. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to join this meeting. My name is Nurumaro, and I work with GCAP, which is Global Call to Action Against Poverty, as a regional coordinator. And today we are expecting to have more than 350 participants who has joined. Before we get to a formal introduction, which will be made by our global director, may I provide few introduction to the meeting rules? There is interpretation, which is we'll be having a simultaneous interpretation English, to French, and likewise, if you want to access any of the language, please go to your icon, to the global icon, and then select interpretation, and then you will select the language which you want to listen to. It can be French or English. And in case it is interfering with the other language, then you can mute the original language. So as we are waiting for others to join, let us give ourselves like 3 minutes to admit all the participants, and then we will start our program. Thank you.
Can we start, Nuru?
Yes, I think we can start. Once again, thank you, and hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the African People's Assembly, organized by the Global Call to Action in Africa, with our coalition members from more than 19 countries. Please, when you join, please mute. The host, I think we should mute all the participants by now. Yes, thank you so much. Because of time, we are expecting to have more than 350 participants, so we will not have the time to introduce each other. But also we have interpretation and a simultaneous interpretation of English and French. Please go to in your Zoom link at your right side. You will see a global icon written interpretation, then click interpretation, and then select the language which you would love to listen from. It might be English or French. And then if it is interfering with the original language, please mute the original audio for you to listen clearly. So thank you so much. So with our agenda today, this is the African People's Assembly, and we have a thing we call it is the Summit of the Future and the Economic Justice, which we have met all of us here today to discuss about how are we going to build our African future, but also integrating economic, social, and climate justice for sustainable development. I will later, after introducing the program, I will welcome our director, Ingo, to provide the objective of the meeting, and then we will go with, we'll run up the program. So by starting, Ingo will provide the introduction, and then we have a Hannah of having Madam Aminata Barry, who is a co-chair of the Global Call to Action Against Poverty. And she's from Mali. She will also provide us with opening remarks and the context of the Africa regarding the economic justice. And then we will go directly to the panel discussion, whereby we have Hannah of having Oyebisi Babatunde, who is the executive director of Nigerian Network of NGO with extensive experience in civic space and in CSO at the national level, regional level, and global level. So he's also going to share his experience and how issues of debt crisis and economic justice are affecting our countries in various areas. We also have a Hannah of having Philip Kalonzo, who is working with the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliances, who is going to share how economic injustice or debt crisis also is affecting issues of climate justice, considering the current climate change challenge. And also we have a hand of having Caroline Kandrisi, who is working with the Policy Innovation Lab Africa, which is a philanthropy and has been working with the Africa and in policies and advisory bodies. And also she is an advisor of the President of the United Republic of Tanzania. We also have a pleasure of having Eso Pedesi, who is the executive director of NGO Genius Vets from Togo, who is also going to share the youth perspective with focus to climate justice and social justice. We have a Hannah of having Dr. Mokiti Monga Kitulo, who is the chief of Goma Congo Handicap from DRC, who has an extensive experience in issues of inclusion and rights of people with disabilities, who will also share his perspective on issues of inclusion and diversity. And then we will have an open discussion for all of us to contribute. We will raise our hand and talk, but because of the number of the people we are having in this meeting, we're also encouraging people to drop their comments, suggestion, and question in the inbox, so as the panelists we will reply. Also, after that, then we go to the response from the panelists. And today in this meeting, we are expecting to come up with the Declaration of Economic Justice with focus to Africa, whereby this declaration will be shared in the Action Days and Summit of the Future, as all of us know that the Summit of the Future is starting next week. And then we'll have a Hannah to have the closing remarks from our GCAP Global Member Council, Mahen, who is working with the Harlem Movement in Mauritius. So that is our program today. And now, may I take this opportunity to welcome you, Ingo, for introduction. Ingo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nuru. Let me. Okay. Pardon, I'm trying to. No, okay. Let me do like this. So, thank you, Nuru, for this welcome and also for all the preparation. I would like to say a few words in French for the interpretation that everybody has interpretation. Alors, bienvenue à vous. Juste pour la traduction, il y a le bouton en bas à droite qui s'appelle interprétation en français, je crois. Et là-bas, il y a la traduction anglais-français. Alors, si vous préférez français, il faut choisir français alors. Okay, now I will continue in English. It's very nice to meet all of you and to see the big interest from many countries across Africa. This is part of a process to prepare the Summit of the Future, which will happen next Sunday and Monday in New York, organized by the UN. And basically, the UN wants to be strengthened to implement the Agenda 2030, the SDGs, but also to strengthen the international cooperation for the different objectives of the UN, including peace. For us, just a few words on the global call to action against poverty. We are a global civil society movement against poverty, obviously, and also against inequalities. We are organized in national coalitions in 66 countries. In Africa, I think there are 21 countries, and there are 11 in Asia, there are 10 in Latin America and the Caribbean, and there are around, how many? 22, I think, in Europe. So we work together from the local grassroots level, community level, to the national, to the regional and the global, so to influence political processes and to hold governments accountable for their promises at the UN. So the Agenda 2030 is one key part of our work. And this is connected to global justice. So it is justice between countries, global south, global north, and within countries. So we are talking about social justice. This includes social protection, health, education, also climate justice, especially the inclusion of marginalized groups, and also economic and financial justice, for example, debt, tax, but also governance. So we have basically discussed with our members and also with many civil society partners in the last months that the whole problem of injustice is a major factor that the SDGs are achieved very slowly. Only 17% of the SDGs are on track. So so we are trying basically to bring people together, civil society, but also groups of marginalized people at national level. So these are national people's assemblies, but also their community assemblies, to formulate their analysis and to formulate their demands towards their governments, and then to bring them to the international level, like regional meetings like this one, but also then to the Global People's Assembly, which will be organized on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday next week. So people from different parts of the world come to New York, bring the messages, also from this assembly, for example, Nuru and Aminata will come to New York, but maybe also some more. So to bring the messages from this regional people's assembly into the global, and we will discuss and bring these messages again into the UN and to the governments in New York. So this is more or less the overview about the GCAP and the process, and I'm very happy to listen to your voices, your perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ingo, for providing that brief introduction. So this is a very important meeting is here. What we are discussing here today, which will come up with a declaration, it is going to be discussed further during the Summit of the Future, and sharing our message with the UN, but also with the like-minded network and organization globally during the action days and during the Summit of the Future. So thank you so much, Ingo. Now, I humbly welcome Madam Aminata. Madam Aminata, she is a co-chair of the Global Call to Action Against Poverty, but also she is a GCAP Mali Executive Director. Madam Aminata, please welcome to your opening remarks and setting the context. Thank you.
D'accord. Merci bien, Nourou. Merci bien, Ingo, et bienvenue à tous ceux qui sont là aujourd'hui. Bonjour, chers militants et militantes pour la cause commune de l'Afrique et dans le monde entier. Soyez les bienvenus à cette Assemblée populaire des peuples de l'Afrique, dont le thème cette année 2004 est construire l'avenir de l'Afrique. Il est important que nous nous mobilisons autour de ce thème, intégrer la justice économique, sociale et climatique pour un développement durable. Ça fait la deuxième Assemblée populaire pour l'Afrique que le GCAP a organisée. Et je pense que nous souhaitons nous mobiliser davantage. Et on sait que c'est le 25 septembre 2015 que les États membres des Nations Unies ont adopté l'agenda 2030 et pour le développement avec les 17 objectifs du développement durable, dont l'objectif est de transformer notre monde en mettant fin à la différenciation entre pays en développement et pays développés et de ne laisser personne pour compte, personne de côté. Alors que les objectifs des ODD devaient nous offrir l'espoir d'un avenir où les gens vivront en harmonie sur la planète sûre et durable, la vision ambitieuse définie dans l'agenda 2030 pour le développement durable qui compromettait la justice économique, sociale et climatique pour tous est loin d'être réalisée. On pensait les atteindre, mais ce n'est pas du tout le cas. Selon l'ONU, seulement 17% des 17 objectifs seront probablement atteints d'ici 2030. Et on sait aujourd'hui, avec le contexte mondial, les guerres, le changement climatique et tout ce qui s'ensuit, nous ne sommes pas sûrs. Donc, parallèlement à la crise mondiale, la dette s'est révélée être une menace urgente pour la stabilité économique et les perspectives de développement de nombreuses nations. En 2022, les pays à revenus faibles et intermédiaires ont collectivement dépensé un montant record de 443,5 milliards de dollars pour le service de la dette publique. Et donc, cela fait détourner des ressources essentielles qui auraient pu être utilisées pour les services sociaux de base tels que la santé et l'éducation. Et plus de la moitié des pays à faible revenu d'Afrique subsaharienne sont déjà en situation de surendettement, aggravant des inégalités qui existent, les inégalités économiques et freinent le développement. Donc la crise de la dette oblige les pays africains à consacrer une partie importante des budgets nationaux au service de la dette. Donc ils font que rembourser une dette au détriment des services publics, des investissements publics essentiels qui devaient être réalisés. Donc les gouvernements sont contraints d'augmenter les impôts des citoyens et ce qui aggrave les inégalités. Au lieu de diminuer les impôts sont en train d'augmenter parce qu'on dit Il faut mobiliser des ressources internes. Donc, les taxes, les autres impôts sont en train de s'augmenter. Cette crise continue également avec l'augmentation de la faim, la perte des moyens de subsistance, la détérioration des conditions climatiques, et tandis que les guerres, la réduction de l'espace civique et les limitations de la liberté de la presse marginalisent davantage les populations. Donc, 2030, c'est déjà demain. Nous sommes en 2025 et nous sommes à la veille de 2030. Il n'y a plus que 5 ans qui nous séparent et le panorama qui se présente est très inquiétant. La transformation de l'architecture financière internationale est impérative pour un changement significatif et la justice économique doit être au centre de cette transformation. Le pacte pour l'avenir doit tenir compte des défis pour un avenir meilleur. Et nous, au niveau de l'Afrique, l'agenda 2063, qui est le cadre stratégique du continent pour le développement, envisage une Afrique unie et résiliente et influente dans la gouvernance mondiale. Dans le cadre de l'Assemblée populaire africaine, nous allons discuter de la manière dont la société civile, en collaboration avec les gouvernements et l'Union africaine, peut défendre des positions communes de l'Afrique sur la gouvernance. Donc déjà, Ingo et Inuru venaient de dire que les résolutions d'aujourd'hui seront partagées au niveau du sommet pour l'avenir au niveau des Nations Unies. Et au niveau africain aussi, nous allons les partager comme on a eu à le faire l'année dernière auprès de nos responsables gouvernementaux et politiques et avec les communautés aussi. Aujourd'hui, au niveau du Mali, on aurait pu être plus nombreux, mais vu que la circulation est sous contrôle parce qu'il y a un événement d'insécurité qui se passe actuellement et chacun en ligne pour contribuer ou bien écouter ce qui se passe. Donc, merci pour tous ceux qui nous ont envoyé des messages de soutien. Donc, cette collaboration vise à garantir que les intérêts du continent africain soient pris en compte lors du sommet de l'avenir en 2024 et accélérer la mise en œuvre de l'agenda 2030 ainsi que le second plan décennal. Donc, les objectifs ont été largement partagés et nous allons passer d'un moment à l'autre au programme qui va s'en suivre. Donc, merci Nourou, merci tous ceux qui viennent de m'écouter. Donc, nous allons passer à la table ronde. Merci.
Thank you so much, Madam Aminata. That was thoughtful. Also, Madam Aminata have set the context that today we are going to discuss about the African situation on debt crisis and how it's affecting our implementation of the SDG in relation to the current status, whereby we see 17th of only 17th of the Agenda 2020 are likely to be implemented by 2030. So, and this is in the African countries, we are being affected by the debt, which is influenced by the financial architectures globally. But now it is our role as African countries, as African networks, civil society organizations, to see how are we going to address these challenges, and how are we letting this to the African Agenda 2063, but also how are we moving forward to influence these reforms as African. So we have a hand of having our panelists today introduce the area who are going to engage with in this thoughtful discussion with all of us. I have already introduced them, so we will go direct to the panel discussion. May I use this opportunity now to welcome Oyabisi Babatunde, who is the Executive Director of Nigerian Network of NGO, to share his thoughts, experience, but how are we moving forward to address the economic injustice which are keeping us behind and causing a lot of economic challenge as African we're facing now. Oyabisi, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Nuru. Can I confirm that you can hear me very well? Okay, good. So a couple of thoughts here, and I think mine would focus solely on some of the lessons that I think we now need to learn more practically in terms of our engagement as civil society. I think as civil society, we have regurgitated a lot around many of those challenges. We now need to start deepening our interventions. For example, not many of us would work on issues of tax, as it were. However, this is one area where we need to now deepen conversations with our governments. Again, when you look at how do governments earn resources, governments earn resources from taxes, from penalties, from loans, and also from businesses or grants, as it were. So conversations around fair tax is now very much important for us as African civil society. We may not necessarily have expertise in those areas, but how do we ensure that, taxes are done fairly and that those who need to pay taxes are paying taxes so that government can have more resources and we can reduce, the burden of having to borrow. The other challenge is when you then look at our budgets across the African continent at this time, there's a lot of overheads that goes into servicing debts. And that then means that when debts are serviced, our governments do not have resources to be able to implement their national development plans or even their manifestos. So there's now the need for us to start focusing attention on debt crisis. I do know that many of us would work on education, health, we'll work on agriculture, but what's the implication for debts, and national budgets for the thematic area that we work? We now need to pay attention to budget conversations and move some of our advocacy towards those directions as well. I've talked about the need for us to talk about taxing fairly, then start conversations around the debt crisis that is already affecting government spending and also government revenues. The other bit also is around social safety net, which you might call social protection. And I'm glad that GCAP is becoming very big on conversations on social protection. How do we ensure that we have very well grown to scale social protection policies across Africa and that they are properly implemented? So, for example, in Nigeria at the moment, we've got about 130 million Nigerians that are in multidimensional poverty. And the social investment program that the president or the government have at this time can only cover 15 million. So there's a need for us to grow to scale. How do we, as civil society, also focus some level of attention into these big topics that have that very promising strategies for us to lift millions out of poverty? Again, not forgetting that many of us would have started doing work around education, around poverty, but some of these areas now need our attention, especially in campaigning and in sitting down with government on implementation around some of these bits as well. There's a conversation around inclusive education and also that around health, especially looking at health insurance. How do we use health insurances as a form of social protection or social safety net to be able to reach millions of people that would be needing coverage in terms of their health, as it were. So by and large, again, mine is to say that we've all done our bits, okay? But now the focus for me in terms of ensuring that we can address social justice would be that we are focusing as civil society on these 4 broad topics and focusing our engagement with government in that direction. It also means that we can't go to government regurgitating many of those dynamics Someone is, okay, we can go to government regurgitating 17% of NGOs will not, 17% of countries will not meet the SDGs. Can we have the country by country breakdown and then find some common collaboration between government, private sector, and civil society on how best to address this? How do we move non-profit resources, all right, towards some of these things? And we're already doing them as non-profits, working in the field of education, working in the field of water and sanitation, working in the field of environment and climate. However, we need to find ways of growing to scale. And how do we grow to scale? Growing to scale means that also we're beginning to pay attention to the drivers of poverty. We are helping government to understand what the drivers of poverty are, what the solutions can be, and evidencing many of this at the national level. While the UN reports will continue to provide that national scale, I do think stories coming from our communities and how we engage with the local government, to the state government, especially in countries where there is a federation, how you engage with the subnational governments, and how you escalate this to the federal level means that you are able to find that complete nuance on who are those that are being left behind, what are their realities, what policy options can we prioritize within budgets, and how do we also ensure that we monitor and track those for us to be able to get that. Of course, added to that is a conversation around civic space, because these days when you demand for accountability, then you find governments coming after you, and it's becoming a big issue. So we need to, again, find ways of protecting and promoting civic space such that we can have citizens that would participate, we can have civil society organizations that can do deep dive budget analysis, look for areas where government can save money, engage with government on those savings, monitor government policies in terms of implementation, provide shadow reports based on transparent, open, and citizens' data that is collected. Engage with what's it called? Bureau of Statistics, so that we can begin to look at SDG-dominated indicators and get government to have some administrative data collected to track how government is progressing in terms of attaining to goals. I think this is the time, as we're talking about the summit of the future, it's also a time for civil society to reflect on the summit of its own future within the attainment of the SDGs. We now need to take more action. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Oyabisi. I think that is a food for thought. Like when we are reflecting to the summit of the future, it's also time to reflect on the future of civil societies and how are we contributing to reforms, or how are we contributing to the change which we need, especially on how are we engaging with the government and private sector and civil society to address this challenge. Oyabisa, we'll come back to you. May I now give the floor to Philip Kalonzo. Philip is working with the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, which is a network working on climate justice. Philip will share with us the experience and thoughts on economic justice in relation to climate justice. As all of us know that currently economic climate justice, climate change is the future. If we are not going to address our climate challenge, we will not exist. Philip, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nuru, for this
one
particular
moment,
opportunity.
Philip. Sorry, Philip. There's one point on the interpretation. So I just checked that the French interpretation is working. Maybe I should say it in French, but alors j'ai juste conforme la traduction en français, ça marche. Je sais pas le problème. C'était quoi, mais si ça marche pas, oui, c'est bien de écrire dans le chat. Mais en général, ça marche bien, je crois. Ok, merci. Sorry.
It's working now, Ingo, thanks.
Yeah.
It is okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Please, if you cannot get your interpretation, please go to the global icon at your right side and click it, and then you will select the language you want. But also, if you are listening from English, for instance, and now it's the English speaker and you can't listen, please unmute your original language to make sure that you hear the original language, because there will be no interpretation of English to English. And if you're listening from other language, please click the language you're listening to. And if there is any challenge, please drop a comment in the comment section. Thank you. So Philip Kalonzo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nuru. Confirm you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Right. Great, and thanks for ensuring that we are running an inclusive process and we have everyone on board. I think the ground has been set by my dear sister Minata and ABC. I think mine is just to drill down on some certain elements which I do consider quite important for climate justice conversation. And right from the onset, it's important to say that even though climate change is actually boxed within the sustainable goal number 13, fundamentally climate change impacts all the sustainable development goals. So if we actually begin from that particular premises, then we begin to see the interrelationship that is there between climate change and the realization of all the sustainable development goals. And sometimes even before we begin talking about the summit of the future, which is actually supposed to yield the pact of the future, I usually begin by saying that we need first and foremost to implement the sustainable development goals as envisaged, as opposed to beginning looking at the pact of the future without also sort of putting a bit of momentum on the implementation of the sustainable development goals, which is very critical. So the team that is actually going to the New York need again to give this a bit of priority in terms of a bit of much more serious recommitment to the implementation of the sustainable development goal as framed. Otherwise, if we are going for the pact of the future without putting much more catalytic action on the sustainable development goals, we'll lose momentum. Allow me to quickly then begin to transcend to some certain critical issues that relate to justice issues, climate justice issues, which are quite important and fundamental to the work of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. I think science is very clear, whether we are talking about the IPCC Act 6 report, whether we are talking about the adaptation gap report. The continent of Africa is highly impacted by climate change, will be impacted by climate change under all mitigation scenarios. Even if we were to cut massively on the carbon that we are producing right now, the continent is still poised to be impacted in a massive way. And there are quite a number of episodes of losses and damage, maladaptation, issues of climate-triggered migrations that again speak to, in a very clear way, the kind of impacts that we are just faced with. But then I keep wondering, again, when we get into this international negotiation, what we usually strike out as a deal, and whether this deal, again, works for us. Throughout, Africa has been pursuing its special needs and circumstance consideration within the discourse of climate negotiation, with a view to ensuring that its vulnerabilities, its special circumstances are taken into account. And this, again, seems to be left out. The special circumstance, again, relate to histories of colonization, relate to histories of debt, relate to historical property context of the continent, but more importantly, the location of the continent along equator, again, meaning any slight increment in temperature means much more greater vulnerability. Yet again, when you begin looking at the kind of conspiracies that we see at the global space, we are seeing developed countries not too agile, not too keen to cut on their emission. And those who have been following the conversation this year in a keener way, you will see that there is less action that is actually being fronted or being advanced, particularly in implementation of the resolution from Dubai, that is COP28, that's begun to talk about a recommitment to transitioning away from fossil fuels. So you can still see it's still business as usual And when you actually look at most of the foreign missions within Africa, working in court with the countries where they come from, there is a kind of conspiracy back to promote the carbon market as a panacea to mitigation. And that is actually a misleading approach in terms of climate action. Instead of developed countries cutting back on their emissions, they are again pushing the burden of cutting down on emission to African countries, particularly through what we are calling the carbon offset, which when you look at keenly, you will realize that they are much of four solutions. So even as we go to the summit of the future, we need to call out on the four solutions that are being penned out. And we need also to talk about the lethargic approach to mitigation that is actually happening, particularly among developed countries, and a much more serious recommitment on cutting of emissions, which ideally will determine the trajectory of the temperatures for this particular globe. So that's something that we need to look into in a much more serious way. I think looking at the climate finance, because again, under the Paris Agreement, developed countries had a commitment to contribute the much needed climate finance. And it was quite clear that climate finance was supposed to flow from the developed countries to developing and less developed countries. That was the formula in terms of flow of resources. But looking at the length which it has taken for developed countries, even to achieve the initial commitment of US dollars 100 billion, you can actually clearly see that even the new collective quantified goal, which is the next goal that is going to be entered into from a climate finance perspective, is just going to be another goal unless a serious recommitment is happening at that particular level. But there are issues that are of serious concern in terms of a recolonization of Africa economies that are likely to happen even as we strive to get the much needed climate finance. The first thing that we need to pay serious attention into, particularly as we go even to New York and in our subsequent engagement, is the dishonoring of the commitment by developed countries, and particularly developed countries' parties. Remember, the Paris Agreement was an agreement of parties, but now parties are quite clear that they will not be able to meet the commitment on their own right unless they are able to mobilize private investments. The private investments come in with a host of other things, first and foremost being a recolonization of our economies, which I'll unpack later in my submission, but more usefully, again, it brings elements of debt, which again brings other complexities that we must also be able to resolve and speak about in a much more clearer way. Right now, as we speak, even the little mobilized climate finance is not necessarily flowing to the south. It's actually flowing back to the north. And how is it flowing back to the north? Look at GCF. GCF until last year, the bulk of the resources were actually being disbursed through institutions that are based in the north. There were no clear and well-structured decentralized mechanism for ensuring that the resources that are much needed for climate action are reaching not only countries, but communities who are at the front line of climate injustices, and ensuring that we are able to secure equitable society in terms of response. But the same funds were actually going to multinational corporation, largely based out of Africa, and doing a kind of pilot observation in terms of implementation of these particular projects. And this has been a problematic trend. Right now, as we speak, we are talking about debt that is coming to Africa to finance climate action. And indeed, China is also joining in the foray of those countries that are loaning Africa to respond to climate issues in a fundamental way. So you begin to see that there is, even as we talk about the private sector role, there is kind of entrenching of the private role and also entrenching of the debt into the conversation, as opposed to a situation where we are able to again push developed countries to take a fair responsibility for the atrocities that they committed. So this is a dichotomy that we need to look into, and particularly looking at how do we push back on the debt? How do we push back on the investments so that we are receiving investments that are not worsening our debt portfolio as a continent? We are seeing a among the countries that received highest debt, I think we have 5 or so, including Kenya. I think Egypt is in that pool. But if African countries were to receive climate funds in form of debts, then we need to begin to take into perspective the 34 less developed countries that are in Africa and what the implication of debt to these countries would portend moving forward. I think we need to go back and begin to look at even the replenishment. What is the nature of funds that are being provided? Let's look at what all the delegates, a majority of the delegates congregating in Dubai last year started to celebrate. They started to celebrate a replenishment of 700 million US dollars to the loss and damage fund. Ideally, if you look at the response and the funds that went to support response to Cyclone Freddy alone in Malawi, it's far beyond the 700 million US dollars that were pledged at that particular level. This is the money that is being put into a kit that is expected to support the entire world, let alone Africa. So you can begin to see the disparities that begin to characterize the finance landscape, and that we just need to push or give a much more harder push in the context of the negotiation. I think I need to speak, moving away from the finance a bit, I need to speak about Africa and the load of burden that it's carrying. Africa is not only affected by climate change, but is at the center of response to climate change, whether it's cutting on our emissions, whether it's helping developed countries to sink their carbon and excess carbon, whether it's providing the much needed transitional minerals. This burden cannot go unrewarded, cannot go unrecognized, because in many instances, when we go to these major meetings, the narrative is of Africa being a continent that is at pity, that is at mercy, that is putting nothing on table. I think what we need to begin to look into, even as we go into the summit of the future and other subsequent engagement, is look at what is Africa putting on table and what is the contribution of Africa to the global systems. And if we are able to premise that in a stronger way, then we will be able to move to the next level. Right now, the world cannot transition to low carbon without relying on the critical minerals. A majority of these resources are found in Africa. So the transitional minerals that we are speaking about right now, we need also to understand that if Africa was to develop, then it needs first to take deeper control of its own transitional mineral resources. For it to do that, the earliest that can happen is from 2032, because all the supplies of the transitional minerals from Africa are all the way up to nearly 2032 are being committed and are being shipped away to developed countries. The key question is then, how are other parts of the world prepared to support Africa in taking greater control of its mineral resources and being able to develop value chains that enable them to optimize returns from such resources, so that again it's not just a continuing business of extraction and exporting of the resources abroad. I think it's something that, again, that behoves our leadership and also comes back to us as Africa in terms of how internally we are going to reorganize to ensure that we are able to create strong conglomerates that serve regions, not just countries. And this is a political conversation that we need to have. Right now, as we speak, I know very soon our commodities will not be very competitive in the global market. Most of the commodities that we are producing will not be competitive because we are producing them using dirty energy. Yet Africa has potential for renewable energy, massive potential for renewable energy that is not being crystallized to support our industrialization agenda. So really looking at how we are connecting this conversation in terms of renewable energy and industrialization agenda will be important. I know I'm about to be stopped, but allow me to close on these two important points.
Please.
The first point is that in terms of the transition itself, Africa has a wealth of renewable resources, but there is a contradiction. We are having an energy sector that is colonized. Power tariffs in Africa remain at all-point high, meaning that the prospects for Africa to industrialize is less and less. So what kind of conspiracy are we peddling in all these conversations around shared goals and shared approaches? I think this is something that we need to think through. Second point, our goods will become less competitive in the global market in very near soon. because again, a number of countries are going into what they are calling carbon border adjustment mechanisms, meaning that if your goods have more carbon content, then they will be taxed highly, and therefore they will be less competitive in the global market. What does this mean? That means Africa losing market in here soon, and it means more poverty, more vulnerability, and all this. And these are all driven by climate change. So I think we need really to locate climate change much more strongly in the conversations, particularly around social issues, the economic justice elements, issues to do with debt, and overall sustainable development for the continent. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Philip. I think that is good food for thought, that African, we shouldn't be the food. We should also sit around the table and discuss about our context and about future. So Philip has enlightened us, like we as African countries, we should work on this together and see in the global governance, in the global negotiation, what are we doing and how are we advocating for our own priorities? And we shouldn't go there just to discuss, especially on issues of climate justice, well, from the COP28, the past resolution to end fossils, while the Western countries are not discussing about the emission they are making. And also he highlighted about the impact of the emission the global north is making is in Africa, but those are not the discussion which are tabled at in the UN. So when we are going to the summit of the future, these are the issues we should discuss. Filippo, I will come back to you during the discussion. May I now welcome Caroline Kandusi, who is working with the Policy Innovation Lab. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nuru. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, participants, depending on where you are actually located. And yeah, this is a very nice forum, and thank you for my fellow panelists who have sort of like, set the tone. And I've had a lot of things like, some sectors that as a collective, the CSO should start thinking about, not only looking at issues around access to health, education, and livelihoods, but sort of like, to challenge other bigger matters. And there's so much wisdom in terms of the current movement when it comes to climate justice. So mine in this conversation, as I understand, like, the end goal of this conversation is sort of like, collect some of the recommendations and what it can be done. I would like to be a bit radical, I think, on this, and this is mostly contributed by my personal journey of being very young, ambitious, and like, really tabling these things, documenting all the shadow reports and submitting them and seeing nothing is happening. I think there's an African wisdom which says, like, whoever writes the story defines where the storyline is. And if you look at the debt crisis, which you're having a conversation, and how poverty continues to be on the rise in Africa, is simply because potentially we are asking the wrong people to think through for us. If we look where the points of the debts and where they're coming from, these things have been done systematically for over the years. This year I had a rare opportunity, a weird one. I walked into the room where the Bretton Woods institutions were signed. And that place is under the mountain somewhere, behind a river somewhere. It's very serene. 8 years ago, people exactly thinking what we are battling with today. So the conversation and the approach has always been very systematic. And as we are thinking our role in the global governance, I think we really need also to spend a lot of time of thinking of our internal system and our internal governance in Tanzania. Just last week, we had the Africa Food System Forum happening in Kigali. And a wise African man, I think is the CEO of Equity Bank, shared an example. Africa has the youngest population. Our human resource, the potential for it, is the highest currently, the most youthful continent, because 70% of Africans are young people, very energetic. We are at the prime time of contributing the most. We have over 60% of arable land where we can really transform agriculture. The question is, why are we not doing it? So number one, yes, there's so many external factors, and my colleagues have highlighted on the systemic injustices with these bodies. And I think where we hope to get the support, and both financially, I think we're not striking a good deal. Instead of collaboration and partnership, they come in terms of debt. And I think a debt which finds a community, which again has a big number of people who are not employed, it means that it hurts them even more. Because if you look at the statistics of debts globally, almost every country has a debt somewhere, somehow. But what does the debt do? So Africa has the debt, but does the debt trickle down, and does that translate into improvement of people's lives? I think that is where the problem is. And what this gentleman said at the African Food System Summit, he said it is very simple. One thing that we need to rethink as Africans is our own internal systems. Because what we currently have, I think in terms of governance, is really a high manifestation of neocolonialism, in a way that you're looking at how governments are interacting with the youth. And I think it's a repeating story of exactly what was happening in Africa 8 years ago, when the colonizers were doing all the bad things to make sure they can take as much from the people more than they can give. So I think it's a moment to pause and reflect. And I'd like, as we pause and reflect, we can do one thing. As we all work in CSOs, I think this is a very common practice that we have. All of us oftentimes do the SWOT analysis. We look at the strength, the weaknesses, the threats, and the opportunities. Just last week, we had the Civil Society Week in Tanzania, and the question was, how does the civil society contribute to this big picture? So I'm so happy to be here, because I believe this is one of the sectors where we have so much room to transform how things are done and sort of like, challenge the status quo. And how might we make that happen as a civil society, as a collective? One thing which we have done for a very long time, and I hear that also historically, that was imposed by the colonialists, is that civil society happened to be a group of people who, during colonial time, they were put by the governments to represent voices of the people. And of course, we took forward the approach, so the civil society has always been the voice of the people. But I think in most of the space, we identified as the third sector. So there's always the public and private, and then we are the third sector. And the biggest work which we've been doing is holding governments accountable. And somehow that has made the civil society, really prominent in policing, in highlighting what is not working. But I think for the future of Africa, and for the future and relevance of our sector, there's a room here to transition from not only holding governments accountable, but to become a hub of experimenting all these systemic solutions that we need to have in Africa for social justice, for climate action, for social services, for economies, for gender equality, and things like that. And how do we become that laboratory? So beyond, I think, conversing, and beyond being put as a third sector to contribute, I think there's a need for civil society to get more sophisticated. And I think one thing which we can learn from the academia and from research bodies is civil society has a lot of solutions, but unfortunately we don't model them, we don't package them. And oftentimes when we get into the tables, we are very good at articulating the problems, but we are not sharing what is an alternative model. And I believe civil society can now act as a lab, and that is what inspired me to start Policy Innovation Lab Africa. we need to be modeling these solutions. We need to be documenting. We need to create the evidence in a way that you get a space in the table. You not only go to articulate what the problem is, but also propose a solution which has been researched, which has been evaluated, which is context aligned, and which is making sense. So I think that is one opportunity that as a civil society, we need to start thinking like entrepreneurs. We need that. We need to start thinking like social entrepreneurs, and we need to be a lot more proactive, not only to articulate our problems, but also our solutions. And another thing which I would like to highlight is when it comes to having the natural resources and having the human capital for the country, I think for the continent, I think it is also very, very, very important. I'll never stop saying it. I think sometimes it becomes obvious and it's a cliche, but we need to revolutionize our education. We missed the industrial revolution. We are now struggling. And if you look at the structure that we currently have, is that the most capitalist states have already sort of like, overtaken the industrial. But we do have technology. I think more than ever, we are in a space where technology is a tool and is a space where we can leverage. I'm always curious. We have so many. You could be in the UK, you could be in the US, and if you call for call centers, they're all in India because they have so many young people and leveraging on technology without the need to be in the spaces, and people are accessing jobs. Because I think poverty is most felt because now youth also do not have jobs. So reforming education and, our technology, it's a space which we need to continue to advocate. Because if our livelihoods are improved, if young people have the jobs, if young people can sustain, then as we're having that conversation, we're bringing the youth voice into challenging the governments, then you have people who are hopeful and they have a message. But at this point, I being a Tanzanian, the numbers are not looking good in terms of the poverty level and the debt level as many other East African countries. So we need to figure out how we optimize and how we make good use of this growing number of young people. I think Kenya is signaling something. You have seen the movement where the government and the leaders are not providing hope for the future. Things may happen. And I think that also has a big potential to continue to destabilize the efforts which we are making. So I think education and technology is something that we cannot stop talking and advocating for as a tool to increase the breadth and width of how we can take in these young people and how they can then later leverage from the available resources in Africa and then build our own economies internally. And maybe I'll just wrap up with one thing. I think we're in the move of also revolutionizing the intra-Africa trade. And at AU level, there's still a lot that needs to be done in terms of freedom of movements. I think we have had so many stories that it is so easy for someone to access United Arab Emirates more than an East African to access a South African nation or sometimes even a Western country, both from aviation sector, from transport sector, from our own systems when it comes to immigration. They're not enabling collaboration. They're not enabling the intra-African trade. And therefore, we are not able to optimize the possibilities of strengthening our own internal economy. Because as much as there's a lot of external forces which can support us, but I'm one who feels that no one is really coming unless we come through for ourselves. And therefore, we need to find our own internal mechanisms as Africans to work together and to collaborate. And without improving the free trade and free movement in Africa, that also may continue to put us in spaces where we are articulating problems and we are not having solutions, because whoever is giving us debt is benefiting from that. So unless they choose to change, otherwise we are going to continue to be victims. And therefore we need to pause, reflect, rethink, do our own research, and create models which will be working for us, so that when we go to the tables, we are coming with alternatives and solutions which have been tested for Africans by Africans. Otherwise, we'll not have anything to really tell the second and third generation at this point. I'll pause there for now.
Okay, thank you so much, Caroline. Yes, it's true. No one is coming for us unless we are addressing our problems ourselves. So Caroline reminded us of our population. Yes, Africa, we have a very high population of youth, more than 40% globally. So how are we going to utilize this population and the technology to address our challenge? But also, she just reminded us on the current movements, taking an example from Kenya, the Gen Z movement, how youth now are taking action because they want this challenge to be solved, but also reminded us on not only these debts, because anyone giving us debts, actually he or she is looking to benefit from them. And let's see, how are we using our own financial architectures to address these problems? So Carolina, we come back to you to see now on your last discussion on what are we going to table at the UN during the Summit of the Future, and we'll hear from the participants. Thank you so much. And now may I take this opportunity to welcome Eso Pedesi, who is Executive Director of NGO Jeunes Vets from Togo. Eso is also a member of GCAP, and he's leading the youth constituents with the global call to action against poverty, and he has been working in the climate justice area. We're also focusing on civic space and the youth empowerment. Eso, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Noro. Et bonjour à tout le monde, particulièrement à Ingo, Aminata, Maën. Et je suis très heureux d'être invité dans ce panel pour faire une communication sur l'impact de la dette, surtout dans notre pays comme le Togo. Et j'aurais bien aimé parler des questions de changement climatique, mais on est tous d'accord que le monde est gouverné par l'intérêt et sans argent, il serait très difficile de réaliser beaucoup de projets de développement. Et alors, ma présentation va se faire en 3 parties. D'abord, je vais donner quelques chiffres par rapport à la dette du Togo. Et ensuite, dire les impacts de la dette sur divers plans, le plan économique, environnemental, social, etc. Et puis faire quelques recommandations qui pourront peut-être servir de plaidoyer pour la délégation de Diego qui sera à New York. Et alors, ma présentation se concentre sur les évolutions de la dette du Togo entre 2019 et 2023, ainsi que sur les implications de ces dettes-là sur le développement durable. Alors, la dette publique du Togo a connu une croissance significative au cours des 5 dernières années, avec les implications notables pour le développement durable. Alors, de 2019 à 2023, la dette du Togo est passée de 3,35 milliards à 5,66 milliards d'euros, avec une croissance annuelle moyenne d'environ 17,21%. Vous voyez que c'est quand même assez énorme. Donc, entre 2021 et 2023, le ratio de la dette, c'est-à-dire le PIB, a évolué de 63% à 66,65%. Donc, restant toutefois sous le seuil de soutenabilité de 70% fixé par l'Union économique monétaire ouest-africaine, donc la zone dans laquelle le Togo, le Mali, le Burkina, le Sénégal se retrouvent dans la zone du UEMOA et d'autres pays. Donc, pour la dette intérieure, c'est-à-dire la dette intérieure même au pays, on note une progression plus lente, avec un taux de croissance annuel moyen d'environ 12% entre 2019 et 2023. Donc, cette dette intérieure, Madame Aminata l'a déjà dit, cette dette intérieure représente des obligations financières du gouvernement envers les créanciers au niveau national, donc les créanciers nationaux. Alors, pour la dette extérieure, on remarque une augmentation significative passant de 1,14 milliard d'euros en 2019 à 2,18 milliards d'euros en 2023, soit une hausse de près de 90%. Vous voyez que c'est énorme. Donc, environ un taux de croissance de 17,72% par an. Donc, ce qui nécessite une recherche de capitaux pour financer les projets au niveau national. L'impact. Quels sont les impacts de cette dette dans le processus de développement ou du moins dans la réalisation même des ODD au niveau national? Notons les impacts à plusieurs niveaux. Donc, les impacts au niveau économique, au niveau social et au niveau environnemental. D'abord, au niveau économique, on note une part importante du budget, c'est-à-dire le budget national qui est consacré au service de la dette. On doit payer la dette, donc ça réduit les ressources disponibles pour les investissements dans le développement durable. La dépendance accrue à l'égard des créanciers étrangers expose le Togo aux fluctuations économiques mondiales et aux conditions de créanciers. Actuellement, on va remarquer que le Togo fait des efforts en termes de développement, mais ça t'aide vraiment à satisfaire toute la population parce qu'elle doit au même moment penser à payer sa dette, mais au même moment penser à faire développer son pays. Donc, sur le plan social ou bien l'impact social, malgré une diminution de l'incidence de la pauvreté de 45,5% en 2018, conséquent 3,5% en 2017, on note les inégalités persistantes. C'est-à-dire que actuellement, les Togolais, il y a beaucoup qui ont du mal à pouvoir vivre parce qu'ils n'ont pas assez de ressources pour pouvoir faire des dépenses peut-être liées à leur logement, à leur déplacement, à l'éclairage et aux petits besoins. C'est très compliqué, même si le niveau de vie est un peu plus bas que peut-être la plupart de ceux qui suivent actuellement le panel dans leur pays. Peut-être le niveau du Togo, le niveau de vie au Togo est beaucoup plus bas, mais au même moment, la population a du mal à pouvoir joindre les deux bouts à chaque moment. Donc, c'est des réalités que nous vivons au jour le jour. Et je pense que peut-être, s'il n'y avait pas cette question de dette, le gouvernement allait prendre beaucoup plus d'argent pour investir dans le développement pour permettre aux gens de pouvoir peut-être manger à leur faim, de pouvoir subvenir à leurs besoins, de pouvoir payer leur loyer, de pouvoir se déplacer, etc., etc. Donc, c'est des cas réels que les populations vivent au jour le jour au niveau du Togo. Maintenant, l'impact environnemental, puisque je suis vraiment dans le domaine du climat, je me bats pour la justice climatique et c'est ce que je fais depuis des années en mobilisant les jeunes pour pouvoir faire des plaidoyers, pour pouvoir initier ou bien entreprendre des projets innovants climato-compatibles et en faisant des consultations au niveau des couches vulnérables pour ressortir des recommandations en termes de plaidoyer que nous soumettons aux autorités, etc. Nous remarquons qu'il y a également une certaine lenteur dans la réalisation des objectifs liés au climat, juste parce que le gouvernement n'a pas assez de ressources pour pouvoir entreprendre des technologies innovantes qui font la promotion du développement durable, qui n'ont pas d'impact, d'incident sur les populations. Donc, les investissements en infrastructures financés par les dettes peuvent avoir des impacts environnementaux significatifs si les projets ne sont pas durablement planifiés. Donc, une expansion rapide peut entraîner une pression accrue sur les ressources naturelles et sur les écosystèmes locaux. Je ne vais pas revenir sur les précédents intervenants qui ont largement parlé des questions d'énergie, des questions de redevabilité en termes des pays moins avancés, des pays développés, et la promesse financière qui a été faite à plusieurs reprises lors des rencontres comme les COP, qui n'ont jamais été tenues. Mais au même moment, on demande à nos pays, c'est-à-dire les pays moins avancés, de pouvoir faire face, de pouvoir progresser dans la mise en œuvre, de pouvoir mettre en œuvre des projets qui n'ont pas d'incidence, qui n'ont pas d'impact sur les populations. Je pense que ça va être vraiment très compliqué si on n'a pas de ressources financières pour pouvoir vraiment respecter ces engagements-là que nos pays ont signés dans ces différentes rencontres. Alors, actuellement, nous nous préparons pour aller à New York. Nous nous préparons pour aller à New York. Ce n'est pas seulement pour faire de la figuration lors des réunions, c'est également pour continuer à faire des recommandations, à faire des plaidoyers pour que ces préoccupations soient prises en compte dans cette négociation. Alors, je fais 3 recommandations que l'équipe de Diego pourra peut-être prendre en compte lors des discussions à New York. Et la première recommandation, c'est le renforcement de la gestion même de la dette. C'est-à-dire, il faut mettre en place des mécanismes plus robustes pour gérer la dette et optimiser l'utilisation des ressources. C'est très important. La deuxième recommandation, c'est l'investissement durable. C'est-à-dire que nous devons assurer que les projets financés par la dette contribuent également aux objectifs de développement durable et diminuent les impacts environnementaux. C'est très important. La troisième recommandation, c'est la réduction des inégalités. Prioriser les investissements dans les programmes de réduction de la pauvreté et de lutte contre les inégalités. Donc, c'est ce que je peux dire par rapport à ma communication. Et en conclusion, la dette, comme nous le savons tous ensemble, c'est un levier crucial pour financer le développement. Mais sa gestion doit être équilibrée pour ne pas compromettre les objectifs de développement durable. Le Togo, par exemple, comme les autres pays en Afrique, doivent s'efforcer de concilier croissance économique, justice sociale et protection de l'environnement dans ces stratégies de financement. Merci à tout le monde.
Thank you so much, Ed, for sharing your thoughts from Togo and experience in Togo, especially on financial obligation to pay the debts, which now is affecting the social services, household, health, education, and this has been a source of inequalities in the country, and also reminding us on the global finances that it should be streamed down to reach the most people who are in need. So we'll come back to you, Esther, during the discussion. Now, may I have a Hannah to welcome Dr. Mokiti Monga Kituro, who is a chief of Goma Congo Handicap organization from Democratic Republic of Congo. Dr. Kituro has extensive experience in working with issues of inclusion and rights of the people with a disability. He will share his thoughts on issues of inclusion, how debts are affecting the special groups and especially people with disabilities. Dr. Kituro, the floor is yours.
Voilà, merci beaucoup de la parole, Nourou. Bonjour à tous, bonsoir, ça dépend de là où vous nous suivez. Merci beaucoup, comme vous l'avez très bien dit dans votre présentation. Je suis Dr Monga Kituro Morkit. Je suis le chef de bureau de l'ONG Congo Handicap au niveau de Goma, République démocratique du Congo. Comme vous l'avez bien dit, Congo Handicap est une organisation nationale qui travaille avec les personnes handicapées. Donc, nous plaidons pour la promotion des droits des personnes handicapées. Maintenant, dans le cadre de la thématique développée aujourd'hui qui concerne la dette dans le cadre des ODD, Lorsque je suivais, parce que là, je suis en train de suivre votre présentation avec quelques personnes handicapées, la première question qu'ils m'ont posée, qui aurait pris cette dette? C'était la première question les personnes handicapées m'ont posé qui sont à côté de moi. Parce qu'à leur connaissance, ils ne connaissent pas réellement d'ailleurs c'est quoi les ODD. Parce que dès la conception des objectifs de développement durable, ce sont des thématiques qui sont restées beaucoup plus au niveau des organisations humanitaires, des ONG, ainsi qu'au niveau donc des grandes personnalités ou bien au niveau des décideurs. Mais malheureusement, la base ou bien la communauté, les membres de la communauté n'ont pas été associés beaucoup plus et impliqués dans le développement, plutôt dans la mise en œuvre des objectifs de développement durable. Et c'est une chose que je peux dire qui est à la base qu'aujourd'hui, on reste encore à 17%, comme l'a bien dit le premier intervenant, à 17% des réalisations des objectifs durables. Comme vous le connaissez bien, les personnes handicapées dans notre communauté font face à différentes barrières, comme les barrières économiques, les barrières sociales, les barrières sanitaires, et ainsi de suite, ainsi que les barrières communicationnelles. Et ces barrières font à ce que ces personnes n'ont pas vraiment accès à suffisamment d'informations dans notre société. Parce que là, il y a par exemple, là où on parle de justice économique, chez les personnes handicapées, cette justice n'existe pas. Parce que les personnes handicapées ont cette barrière économique et cette barrière fait à ce que les personnes handicapées sont vraiment parmi les plus marginalisées dans la communauté. Il y a aussi la barrière communicationnelle. Par exemple, je vais même donner l'exemple de notre forum d'aujourd'hui. Normalement, dans les conditions normales, il devrait y avoir un interprète à langue des signes qui devrait faciliter même la communication pour les malentendants dans le cadre d'un forum pareil. Malheureusement, il n'y en a pas. Et cette barrière se trouve presque partout dans le monde actuellement. Les personnes handicapées se retrouvent beaucoup plus, surtout les personnes handicapées sensorielles, se retrouvent beaucoup plus marginalisées dans le cadre de la communication. Et ça rend à ce que leur façon de participer dans la vie courante, dans les activités courantes, devient beaucoup plus compliquée. Il y a aussi la barrière sociale, la discrimination que les personnes handicapées font face dans la communauté et dans notre région. Vraiment, les personnes handicapées sont mises de côté et leur participation dans différentes décisions devient de plus en plus très compliquée. C'est pourquoi, moi, comme proposition dans le cadre des objectifs de développement durable, je pense il y avait tout. Théoriquement, vraiment, dans la conception de ces 17 objectifs de développement durable, il y avait tout. Mais c'est plutôt dans la pratique là où on a biaisé. Parce que, comme on le voit très bien, il y avait l'objectif de développement durable numéro 10 qui était l'inégalité, plutôt réduction des inégalités. Je pense d'ailleurs pour moi, ça devrait être l'objectif de développement durable numéro 1. Parce que si on commençait par là, même dans le développement, dans la suite et dans la mise en œuvre des différentes activités pour atteindre ces objectifs, il n'y pouvait pas y avoir de couacs. Malheureusement, c'est quelque chose qui n'a pas réussi parce que les inégalités restent toujours là. Et lorsque je parle des inégalités, en premier, je vois les inégalités qu'il y a entre les personnes sans handicap et les personnes handicapées. En bref, c'est quelque chose que je voulais beaucoup plus ajouter par rapport à ce forum d'aujourd'hui. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kitilo, for sharing with us how people with disabilities are being affected with the slow implementation of SDG. But also I will come back to you to discuss now, what do you think about the debt crisis, especially on recommendation, because we see our government is spending a lot of income, more than 30% of the incomes, for instance, in Congo, is going to pay debt instead of going to initiatives to empower people with disabilities or people with disabilities initiatives in the country. So thank you so much to all of my panelists. I think, dear participants, you have heard insight from our panelists. A big thanks to Madam Aminata for the context, and also Oyabisi, especially on the context of the civil society organization. But we also heard from Philip Kalonzo on issues of climate justice and debt crisis. But we also heard on Caroline Kandusi on issues of how we as African are changing ourselves, especially on issues of policy innovation and using the resources we have as African. But we also heard from ESO from Togo sharing how debt crisis is affecting the social services in Togo, including issues of climate justice and climate actions. But also now Dr. Kitulo has summed up with issues of inclusion. Now we are going to the open discussion to get more insight from the participants. So we would love to hear your insights on issues of debt crisis and economic justice. But we as Africa, how are we moving forward? What are we presenting on the table during the Summit of the Future, so as we can move from here and we can address our challenge? How are we using our resources? What are we going to negotiate in the UN? But what will we put on the table in our negotiation? And I remember one quote from one of the panelists that we do not want to be the food. We also want to sit around the table and discuss at the UN, negotiate for the global governance reforms, for financial architecture reforms, so as we can address these issues collectively. And there's one comment also, I think it was from Philip, on issues of multinational cooperation. So the methodology will be, you will raise your hand and then I'll allow you to speak, but also you can drop your comment, question, if you have a question to the panelists on the chat, but also you can drop your suggestion on the chat. So the floor is yours. Participant, please raise your hand, then I will allow you to contribute. Thank you. Arbe Matukane, please have the floor. And after Matukane, then Winifred will be the second.
Okay, good day, everyone. It is actually my first time to be in this kind of a meeting. I'm Aubrey from South Africa. Yes, I have always been in the field of agriculture, and then we have recently formed an organization that is sustainable agriculture for climate change. And then in the organization, we also advocate for the SDGs. Obviously, there are a number of SDGs that talk to more of towards the agriculture part of what we are doing. Like, for instance, your zero poverty and all those, the ones that link more to agriculture. In actual fact, we try to advocate for those. My actually question, or maybe my question that is seeking clarity a little bit on this platform, since it is the first time. Okay, maybe I should just give a little bit of a background. Coming into the issues of the climate change, I started through my own understanding of the issues of climate change through working in agriculture and all those things. Furthermore, as time got by, okay, fine, I started joining organizations like your praise, doing the praise programs and so on, just to equip myself.
Aubrey, I'm sorry, because of time, can you go please direct to your question or contribution, and then if you have anything to add, please drop a comment in your comment section. Thank you. You have 1 minute, please.
Yes, sorry. Yes, my question, in actual fact, is how to be part of these platforms, like just a platform like this. Like I mentioned, that it is my first time in this platform, and furthermore, is there any affiliation and so on? And also, for the organization, like our organization, which is Sustainable Agriculture for Climate Change and so on, is there any support that we can actually seek from a platform like this? So to be included, so to be involved, so to put it. Sorry for not being organized, but I don't have the right words in actual fact. Yes,
Thank
yes.
you, Aubrey. Your question is noted. We'll come back to you to answer during a reply. So Winfred, before Winfred taking the floor, so we are in a discussion, and today we are discussing on how we as Africa are going to address issues of economic injustices with the focus to debt crisis, whereby we have discussed the issues of climate justice, but social justice, issues of, we see most of our government are not meeting our budgets on education, health sector, on environmental actions, on women rights and others. And we are not attaining our development plans because our government are spending more than, averagely more than 30% of our income to pay debts. So how are we addressing this challenge in a global governance, especially on financial architectures? Now, next week, we'll start the Summit of the Future, starting with the action days, then going to the summit itself. How are we, what are we going to table at the UN to discuss, and what are the proposals from the African region? Thank you. So Winfred, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
මෙම ඓතිහාසික උරුමය සංවර්ධනය කර පවත්වා ගැනීම සඳහා රාජ්‍ය අනුග්‍රහය නොඅඩු හිමිවා.
Wilfred, you should unmute yourself.
Winfred, we can. Winfred, please proceed.
Maybe the admin can unmute him.
Winfred,
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm Wilfred John from Kenya.
Thank
and I'm
you.
happy to be in this conversation for African countries. But one thing I want us to ask ourselves as countries from Africa, has our leaders done enough that we can have our own conversation, not only convened by UN, but convened by African leadership and by Africa CSOs and African governance systems for economic justice, which has been happening in our countries in Africa. It is now a high time to us all as men and women of these countries. We see to it that we can work together as family, as an African family, so that we can proceed ahead working on matters health and also advising our government. And also we need leaders to be very clear on the agenda that they are for the people. They get into their minds that leaders and young men and women of this country have got a lot of energy, a lot of education, a lot of understanding of different aspects. And they should also give room to the young to give them advice on matters that are currently happening in the 21st century. Let us call for all our leaders. Let us convene our own meetings, not only for UN, but for African leadership,
that we can also have and air issues together as an African country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Winfred, for that contribution. And then now, Salha Kofe, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. And I just want to contribute briefly towards the meeting. Actually, what we need to do as Africans in meeting the Summit of the Future is one, regards the governance system in Africa. Most of the people, why we're not having climate justice is because most of our leaders are not actually including climate change in most of their program schedules. So multiple stresses in governance structure and also lack of education on those issues actually is what's hindering us as Africans. So if we want to have a climate justice, we need to actually call for a reform into policies around climate, agriculture, and environment. Actually, where we can actually blend the macro and the micro policies around the grassroots and those around at the national body we are in the government controls. So we blend them together. So actually, to me, we can have climate justice. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Sahil. Now, Omari Chazua. Omari, please unmute and speak.
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening, good afternoon. I'm Omari Chazua, a teacher educator at the Ministry of Education, also the CEO under Sustainable Global Initiative, NGO which is working, focusing on environmental conservation. Based on this meeting, actually, I want to say that we Africans, we have a lot of, if it is expertism or what I can say, you can say that we have a lot of CSOs, NGOs, which they can work in a cooperative way. I think we can push our development. But when you find now, we have, despite of having these CSOs, but we cannot find, I don't know to what extent are we pushing the development. I cannot blame that we are not pushing, because even me, I have such NGO, but as one of the presenters said that when we go for at the table, I mean that we must have something to share. Don't expect that we can depend on those donors. So, for instance, for the issue of climate change, what I was thinking that education play an important role, particularly when we integrate climate issues or climate aspects in our curriculum, particularly starting from the low level of pre-primary to the university. So
Omar, please, can you sum up?
Yes.
Can you sum up? We have
yes.
Please sum up to contribution on the global financial structures. Thank you.
Okay, the integration of climate change actually will enhance our programs and actually our decision, particularly when we are deciding what we can do, especially when we are we want to minimize the issues of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar, for your contribution. Now, Jembere Milton, please, the floor is yours. I see you already unmute. Go ahead.
Merci.
Jembere.
Bonjour tout le monde. Moi, je m'appelle Jembere Alamir. Je suis le chargé de mobilisation et de plaidoyer au niveau de appelé Mali à l'Alliance malienne contre la pauvreté. Merci à tous les membres du GCAP. Merci à ma directrice générale du Mali, Aminata, qui a déjà implanté le contexte que nous partageons vivement avec elle, un contexte qui avait soulevé les enjeux et les défis. Nous, aujourd'hui, ce que nous devons faire, c'est la question que nous devons faire. Comment nous mobilisons pour que les voix soient entendues, afin que les inégalités soient carrément résolues dans ce contexte mondial. Et cela ne peut pas se faire si la jeunesse, notamment les femmes, les jeunes, les personnes vivant avec handicap, ne soient pas unis autour de la solidarité de mobilisation sociale. Nous ne pouvons pas aller dans la gouvernance mondiale si la voix des jeunes et des femmes et des personnes vivant avec handicap ne soit pas prise en compte. Et nous pensons aujourd'hui que c'est le défi majeur que nous vivons ici, et notamment les pays sahéliens qui se trouvent aujourd'hui dans un contexte spécifique d'insécurité, d'économie, mais aussi d'autonomisation des femmes et des personnes auxquelles ils sont confrontés. Donc, nous partageons largement la thématique qui nous réunit aujourd'hui autour de comment intégrer la justice économique, sociale et climatique pour un développement durable. Le développement durable aujourd'hui, c'est que nous devrons faire en sorte que la prise en compte, la prise dans toutes les politiques, y compris les changements climatiques, y compris les politiques économiques, y compris les droits équitables, justes et prospères. Oui, j'ai dit, je vous remercie, c'est tout juste ma communication. Merci.
Thank you so much, Dembele, for that contribution. Now I see one hand from Jacobo Nkumi. Jacobo, please unmute and take the floor.
Thank you so much. I'm Jacob Ngumi from Kenya. I work with an NGO called Young Professionals for Development. We deal with the professionals training and capacity building, research and policy, advocacy in Africa in 3 major areas, in health, environment, and also economic empowerment and leadership. My concern is about social contracting. When you're going to the Summit of the Future, we need to push for social contracting. I remember I was at the UN CSO conference in Nairobi, preparing for the Summit of the Future, and we put an agenda on social contracting to be taken to the Summit of the Future in New York. The Summit of the Future will be a global decision-making body. So my recommendation is social contracting will mean that governments all over Africa or Latin America or globally, they will be able to give their tax collections from relevant ministries which are social in nature, like Minister of Health, Minister of Environment, Minister of Education, ministries of Agriculture, all those ones which are social, Minister of Social Services. They can give, they can be able to tender to NGOs, so that NGOs can also be able to implement. They can be given funding, can give funding to NGOs the way they give to private sector. Well, there's no law globally which prevents NGOs being given funding by governments. I don't know why private sector is given and NGOs are given. Private sector is profit making, NGOs are not profit making. So we push for social contracting so that we reduce corruption and we create efficiency within government systems and be able to serve the people, both in government and both in the civil society sector. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Jacob. I think I don't see any hand for now, but I see there are some comments in the chat box. And I see a comment from Prince from Abuja. The current generation need to stay united to fix the current generation first. Without a perfect the current system, we cannot solve anything. And then Africa, we should, oh, sorry. And I say committee, most of cases, especially people with a disability, are left, but not here in Nigeria, have disability movement where issues are discussed. Africa, we should have our own currency, and that we need action to oriented minds for today's and tomorrow, then we secure future. I think those are the comments. We will include them in the documents we are preparing. And thank you all for your contribution. We've had different thoughts from different countries on issues of agriculture, on issues of economic justice, social justices, issues of social contracts, especially on issues of taxes from the last contributor. And now, may I take back the floor to my panel. Now we have had the contribution from other people, from participants. And what do you propose when we are going now to the Summit of the Future? And from this meeting, we are going to develop a declaration which will be shared, sharing our African context and declaration about us during the Summit of the Future as a global call to action against poverty in Africa. And now we are focusing on climate justice and social justice, but also we are also focusing on issues of economic justice and sustainable development. So when you speak, you can answer any of the questions which have been asked, and then you can also provide a recommendation which should be in the declaration. So to start, maybe now I'll start with the ladies first. Caroline, can you start?
Yes, thank you so much, Nuru. I think a lot has been shared, a lot of, I think, wisdom and movement, and I'll take it from the part, again, where we really need to provide, like, the alternative solutions. And I'll share recommendations coming from philanthropy and investment, and also sort of like, investing in the civil society across Africa. As we advocate for financing, it is very important to advocate for unrestricted financing, because again, the current financing both to the governments and even to the civil society comes with so many strings which are attached, and they defeat the purpose of solving African problems. And then my other recommendation is to look for the possibility, if you're talking about debt, I know the World Bank has come up with a whole department and an arm for social inclusion. It has a certain name. I'll share with it. I'll share it with you. Nura had a chance to meet even the leader of that. If there's a possibility that these environmental, social, and governance compliance requirements, if they can add the possibility of bringing the voice of the people. We don't want to learn about the debts once they have been clocked, but it would be very great to use technology to know about these debts as the governments are thinking about and get the voices of the people. I think technology is now an enabler, and it is very much available. So what we really require is political readiness for the decision makers and people who are sort of like funding this. And the very last one is continued investment in the future of work for people of Africa. That is the only way. When people are productive, then we are able to come out of these social injustices. So investing in the future of works, for me, it's education reforms and also investing in technology in Africa. We don't want to be given fish to eat, but I think all the investments should be on enabling our own fishing industry. So we don't want deals to come and people to decide how we use our natural resources and where we take it. But rather, if it's a partnership, one which is making sense is the one which is enabling Africans in their own context and with their own needs to be able to achieve that. So I think that should be a solid, and it's a recommendation I'd love to.
Thank you so much, Karen, for those strong recommendations. That will take them to declaration now. May I take the floor to Dr. Kitulo now? Please, Dr. Kitulo, for a minute to get your recommendation on global financial structures and what do you propose, especially on issues of inclusion and social justice. Dr. Kitulo, are you ready?
Oui, je suis là, je suis prêt. Voilà, merci beaucoup une fois de plus de la parole. Avant de donner ma recommandation, je voulais rappeler une statistique. Les personnes handicapées représentent 15% de la population mondiale, soit plus d'1 milliard de personnes au monde. D'où, en faisant ma recommandation, moi, je voulais seulement dire quelque chose, ne laissez personne pour compte, ou bien ne laissez personne à côté. Donc, dans toutes les démarches que les panélistes vont mener après cette réunion, il faut essayer de voir comment inclure tout le monde, de la base jusqu'au niveau des décideurs. Parce que c'est là où réside le grand problème. Les ODD ont été décidés, ont été gérés par les ONG, tout ça, par les responsables, ainsi de suite. Mais la base, la communauté locale n'a pas été impliquée. Actuellement, vous pouvez faire une enquête, entrer sur le terrain, voir est-ce que la communauté locale a des informations par rapport à ça. La majorité n'auront pas cette idée ou bien n'auront pas cette information. D'où il sera vraiment ne laisser personne pour compte, prendre en compte que ce soit les besoins spécifiques des personnes handicapées ainsi que de la communauté locale, et je pense qu'on finira par évoluer. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much for that recommendation. Nothing without us, for us. So may I now take the floor to Oyabisi Babatunde, if you're ready for the recommendations, please, and answer any questions from the participant which are raising if you feel like answering. Oyabisi, are you ready?
Yes, please. I think mine would be to all what the other participants, they hold valid, but I think we need to focus on a recommendation around debt forgiveness. I know this may be hard at this time when our government may not necessarily have shown what they have used some of this debt for, but we now need to focus attention on that. We do also need to amplify the need for social investment. And while doing this, we must also ensure that we are providing some suggestions on how these social investments can be tracked, monitored, and ensure that it works for the people. Again, we have to look at cross-sector partnerships or collaboration. Again, this is very much important at this time. How do we use public development banks, for instance, to ensure that funds that they release can help us attain the sustainable development goals? How do we also look at other alternative sources of funding? And this is where conversations on fair taxes comes in. The rich must pay their fair share of the taxes, and also citizens as well. We need to foster an enabling environment because we can't continue to operate as civil society without an open civic space. And across Africa, civic space is shrinking from citizens being threatened, those sometimes being arrested, all right, for protesting and all of those bits. We need to ensure that, the space is protected. Within that protection of the space also is the need for the UN itself to be open to civil society organizations. Many of us that have been working on multilateral governance will see how the space for civil society is also shrinking at the UN itself. And we need to find a way of ensuring that civil society organizations are involved. The other bit is to now start thinking around reforms of international financial architecture. When you look at the ODA that was promised some years back, we're not really feeling the effect of the ODA. If you have followed conversations from bond, for instance, around the ODA coming from the UK government. We noticed that that ODA is still being spent in the United Kingdom. It's not leaving the United Kingdom, and yet it is accounted for what the UK government is spending, even though they're spending it on refugee inside the UK. It's not coming to Africa at all. We need some level of accountability in those areas as well. So this will be my initial thinking in terms of recommendations.
Thank you so much, Oyabisi, especially on highlighting issues of multilateralism, cooperation, and issues of financial architecture, global financial architecture reforms. And now, may I get to Philip Kalonzo for recommendation, please.
Thank you for this opportunity. I think I'll try to address some issues that were raised by Wilfred, and elements that were also brought by Sir and Omar in terms of climate justice elements, but also provide some certain recommendation in the process. I think we need to internalize climate justice in the right way. Yes, cutting on our emission is a priority. Decarbonizing is a global agenda. But beyond decarbonization being a global agenda, we must also look at developed countries who have a history of pollution, a history spanning more than 300 years of pollution, emitting tons and tons of carbon each year. And therefore, justice elements mean that they've used their fair share of space. And therefore, moving forward, and even as we engage with the Summit of the Future, we must be more brutal in terms of requesting the North to demonstrate clear quantum, clear targets by which they are cutting on their emissions, as well as timelines within which they are cutting these emissions. That is non-negotiable from that particular perspective, even as we do what we are doing within this space. I think these are recommendations that sort of cuts across all the sustainable development goals, even though I'll try to frame it within the climate finance perspective. And this is about high quality climate finance. And when we talk about high quality climate finance, we are saying, number one, the quantum must be clear. How much is the amount? When is it going to come? What is the nature of the fund? Will it be grants-based or will it be loans? And this is a recommendation that can be amplified across all the sustainable development goals because all the goals require to be financed. If they require to be financed, then the amount of financing that is being committed at global level to actualize the sustainable development goals and even the pact of the future must be extremely clear, as well as the sources where it's going to come from. I think my next recommendation is more of a principle. And the principles are largely hinged on international convention. Common but differentiated responsibility based on capabilities is an overarching principle around climate action. And that what that means is developed countries must provide resources. The resources must flow from north to the south, not the vice versa. What we are seeing is that resources are now, funds are now flowing from south to the north, which ideally needs not to be the case. I think we've been operating under fraudulent system because somebody gives you a loan to construct a house, you pay the loan, and they still claim the house to be theirs. That is the fraudulent system that we've been operating under, where we've seen loans being counted as part of contribution, climate finance contribution from such falsehood should end. And in our subsequent engagement, we must be clear whether they are concessional loans or loans given under whichever terms that constitute our own contribution, because we are fundamentally paying for all these elements. So we need to go back and exert much more pressure around this. I think we need to go back to the multilateralism. How is it operating? And it's connected to climate finance and the financing architecture. Governments giving their own, that is other government players' resources to respond to action. And that explains partly why sustainable development goals cannot move, among other things, because we are in a framework where developed countries are giving resources through governments in developing and less developed countries to implement some certain actions, including climate action. The tragedy around it is that those resources are not flowing to the front line. They are not getting to the last mile where action is required to transform poverty, vulnerability status, and to address, in fact, most of the money is not landing, even in Africa in the first place. So can we first fix the multilateralism and ensure that we have much more open space for this? And there is a narrative. I'm not saying African leaders are not corrupt. They are corrupt to the core. But this narrative could be probably misleading. I think we need a global pact around corruption, because the institutions that corrupt African leaders are in the north. They are premised in the north. They give resources, but those resources only trickle. So we need to go back and look at what would be the new architecture that should actually guide us in terms of pushing back on corruption that is so rampant within the sector. But then very finally, it's about looking at how do we ensure that we have decentralized, people-centered economic systems. As it is, we've been talking about social, and this is where it sometimes finds the faultness in civil society work. We are very active in social, and when GCAP comes in with economic discourse and then that, I'm more than happy, because part of the conspiracy has been in consigning CSOs in the realm of social discussions as opposed to economic discussions. So we probably need to begin to look at the remaining pace of the Sustainable Development Goal and look at how do you achieve inclusion without economic inclusion? How do you achieve inclusion without ring fencing or ensuring that the few economic sectors that are controlled by people are not vulnerable to vagaries of climate change? I think we need to go back then. We need to look at the value chains. How can we ensure people play much more prominent role in value chains? I've seen investors coming to do decentralized solar system. For heaven's sake, do we need investors to come and do decentralized solar systems in Africa? Can it be an investment opportunities for communities in the spirit of ensuring communities enjoy a pie of proceeds from the energy sector? Let me rest my case there before I get more. Thanks.
Thank you so much for those recommendations. We should take them now. Let us conclude from the panelists with the ESO. Please, in a minute, we are behind the time. Please provide your recommendation, and then we go direct to the closing remarks, whereby Mahen from Mauritius will close for us. ESO, the floor is yours.
Bon, merci Nouro. Est-ce que j'ai encore grand-chose à dire? Hello. Est-ce que j'ai encore grand-chose à dire? Je ne pense pas, parce que les prédécesseurs ont déjà énuméré tellement de recommandations que si je ne fais pas attention, je risque de me répéter. Mais bon, néanmoins, il y a un aspect très important sur lequel j'aimerais revenir. Et la dernière fois, lors de l'Assemblée des peuples organisée au Togo avec le système des Nations Unies, je l'ai dit et je vais encore le répéter ici. Et nous qui sommes des acteurs au développement, donc des organisations de la société civile, nous sommes des acteurs incontournables. Je dis bien, nous sommes des acteurs incontournables. Je le répète une première fois, nous sommes des acteurs incontournables dans le processus de développement. Donc, c'est un aspect qui est très important sur lequel la délégation de DGEP doit marteler lors du sommet de l'avenir pour demander à ce que ces acteurs du développement soient régulièrement soutenus, pas seulement financièrement, mais techniquement et moralement, pour accompagner le processus de développement. Sans nous, il serait très difficile, je dis bien très difficile, de promouvoir le développement dans nos pays et dans le monde entier. Donc, c'est une recommandation qui est vraiment très importante pour moi parce que les États n'auront pas peut-être assez de ressources pour donner au gouvernement, pour pouvoir mettre en place des actions. Mais les petites ressources disponibles, peut-être distribuées aux organisations de la société civile, pour mener des petites actions à bas niveau qui vont rejaillir au niveau national et ensuite au niveau privé. Donc, merci encore et félicitations pour ce meeting.
Thank you so much, and a round of applause to all of our panelists. May I thank you in a group, you did a good job, but thank you all to all the participants. Now, before going to the closing remarks from Mahen, may I please, I have a humble request to all participants to turn on your camera so as we can have a group photo before the closing and way forward, please. Turn on our camera, and then Pradeep will assist us taking a photo of all of the group, a group photo of all participants, please. Pradeep, are you ready for a group photo, please? Pradeep, please let me know if you have already taken a photo, a group photo of all participants. Yeah, let's continue with our camera on, and thank you all for your contribution. So we will take all this recommendation to declaration, which will be shared with all of you, or we have our emails, and what we have discussed here, we will take them to the table in the UN during the action days and during the summit of the future, and we give you the feedback on what we will achieve with this. So we have received a recommendation on issues of integrating economic issues, but also on social justice, on climate justice, and for sustainable development goals. But we see a strong recommendation on multilateralism, that we as a civil society organization, we need collaboration at UN level with our government, with the CSO, with our financial institutions to address this challenge together. It will not be a one-man show, but also we as Africa, we need to stand on our own. We must take actions ourselves, because no one is going to address our challenge unless we take action to address them. So thank you so much. Now, I humbly request Mahen to take the floor for the closing remarks, and that will be the end of our meeting today. I'm looking forward to meet you all, whether visually or physically, at the Summit of the Future and during the action days. Mahan, please take the floor. And before Mahan taking the floor, I would like to take an opportunity to thank our interpreters who have done a very good work. Thank you so much, our interpreters. I think they provided an excellent service. Thank you. We had 2 interpreters, and they did a good job. Thank you, Atiene and Margaret, for the good job, and looking forward to work with you. Now, Mahen, please, the floor is yours for the closing. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuru. And Nuru, congratulations again. So, dear colleagues, friends, our GCAP members and fellow advocates for social, economic, and climate justice, it is with great honor and gratitude that I address you today as we close this Africa People's Assembly, a gathering that has brought to light critical issues for the future of our continent and our people. As we draw this pivotal gathering to a close, I want to begin by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to each one of you for your participation and commitment. We have discussed key topics that are essential to achieving integrated justice, economic, social, and climate justice, and we have laid the foundation for concrete actions rooted in our shared values. Today's discussions have reminded us of the power of solidarity, the urgency of our cause, and the vision we hold for a just and sustainable Africa. Africa stands at a crucial crossroad. As our speakers have reminded us, the debt crisis and economic inequality continue to strain our countries, while the promises of Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063 demand renewed commitment. The data is clear. Only 17% of the Sustainable Development Goals are on track to be achieved by 2030. As we take this reality seriously, we cannot ignore the immediate challenges our region faces, from climate change to the growing social divide. Today, we have called for action. We have spoken with one voice to demand the cancellation of unsustainable debts and the reform of an international financial architecture that has for too long failed the people of Africa. We have called for progressive taxation that holds the powerful accountable, ensuring that multinational corporations contribute their fair share to the economies they benefit from, while we relieve the unjust burden on our most vulnerable citizens. Africa's response must be strong and united. We need a radical transformation of the international financial architecture with economic justice at its core. We have discussed the importance of cancelling unsustainable debts and implementing fair debt work-out mechanisms to restore economic stability. Additionally, progressive taxation policies must be at the heart of this change, ensuring that multinational corporations contribute fairly, avoiding the perpetuation of tax evasion that drains our resources. Looking ahead, we commit to building a resilient, inclusive, and just Africa. The collaboration between civil society, governments, and the African Union must be the backbone of this transformation. Let us not leave here today disheartened by the obstacles, but rather emboldened by the progress we are making together. Through civil society, governments, and the African Union working hand in hand, we can ensure that Africa's voice is not just heard, but heeded on the global stage. I leave you with this thought. The change we want to see in Africa must start with us. We must be the agents of that change. Every step we take towards economic, social, and climate justice is a step towards a better future for all. Thank you, all of you, for your dedication. Thank you for your passion. Together, we will build a fairer future for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahen. Yes, true. The change we want in Africa must start with us. So thank you all for your participation. Thank you, my speakers. Thank you, Madam Aminata, for setting the context. That has been a very informative and insightful discussion. So they will come up with a declaration which will be shared to all of our GCAP coalitions and participants who has participated in this meeting. And this is on the beginning. This discussion should continue. And thank you all, and bye-bye. So
Bye.
we will leave the comment section for 2 minutes if you have anything to drop.
Merci à tout le monde. Merci Nourou. Vous avez bien modéré. Merci à tous les participants et participantes. Et merci aux traducteurs. Merci et au revoir. J'espère qu'on sortira un très bon document. Merci à tout le monde.
Thank you.
Hello.
Bye.